Welcome to your daily dose of theological German. We are still working our way through this book here, Hermeneutics of the Torah, a study on the tradition history of Proverbs 2 and the composition of Proverbs 1 to 9. Well, buckle up, everybody. We've got a fairly convoluted sentence today. It's not super hard to translate in terms of the individual kind of words or structures of it. But there's kind of a lot going on here in terms of the way this author uses offset phrases and kind of modifying, discourse markers and things like that. And so this is going to be a good example of how sometimes you want to just separate a sentence up into its parts by the commas, which you can see here. Kind of separate the clauses, and you want to just translate each part sort of by itself without necessarily even trying too hard to figure out how they fit together until you get them each translated, and then you're able to sort of rearrange them into a sentence in English that flows a little better and makes better sense. So let's just go ahead and start working on each of the parts. The first part's not too difficult. This procedure or method, this is a word which has been used several times already in this book, so you should be familiar with it by now. This procedure / method of the exegesis of older texts, okay, so that whole phrase is your subject, and then this is your main verb. Sich lassen is a verb which you should really just be able to quickly recognize and translate as can be, but it is kind of a modal, so it will have to pick up an infinitive somewhere later on. Can be what, and you need usually an infinitive to complement it. So this first little clause is basically your subject and your main verb, okay? So now let's look at the second one. As it, the Egyptian material shows, so that's really wooden. What's actually going on here is this S is actually your object. That's an accusative S. And so as the Egyptian material presents it or shows it to be or something like that is what you're going to have to translate there. So you can see that that's actually just a kind of a modifying clause, which you haven't gotten to the complement yet for your sich lassen. So this is just kind of like adding some flavor and flair. Okay, so let's see what the next one says. At the same time, not on a determined or particular epoch. Festlegen is, you can kind of see it's a compound. I mean, it's a verb, but fest meaning secure or something like that, and legen to lay. And this verb just means to establish or something like that. So simultaneously, not on a particular or determined epoch to establish. So there's your infinitive, and that's actually what's going to go with your sich lassen from up here. So you can start to see, but there's some confusing things already because your negator is down here, and that's the reason that's down here is because it negates the infinitive. But in English, you're going to feel like it wants to negate the translation of sich lassen. You're going to want to say something like it cannot be established or something like that. But let's pick up the next phrase before we totally finish translating this sentence. Rather, or you might want to say but, probably is going to flow better in English. But, and actually with this type of a conjunction, so you do have like a subordinate clause here within the sentence, but with this type of it's a conjunction, it's not like a relative modifier or something like that. And so with this type of conjunction, you do end up with kind of a main clause, which is why sondern becomes a sort of an adverb or a modifier, and bildet, the verb here, actually shows up in second position. But you don't actually have a subject here. And so what you need to do is supply the subject from up here previously, the method of exegesis of older texts. Cannot be something there, which we'll get back to, but forms or constitutes, apparently, offenbar means something like apparently or appears to be. And then this is accusative. It forms a characteristic or like a feature, a trait, attribute of, and then here you have a compound word which breaks up here. Just keep in mind, anytime you have a compound word, it's often going to be a type of genitive construction in English if it's not one that you can compound easily in English. And so what you do is you just take the first constituent and use that as a genitive modifier on the second constituent. And so here you would say something like cultures of writing or cultures that have writing, or you could even just say literate cultures. So let's see if we can piece all of these chunks together in a way that flows better for an English sentence. So I'm actually going to take this clause first because this is kind of a modifier that affects the whole sentence, and it sort of dangles there. I mean, you could put it later in an English sentence, but it sounds convoluted. It's better to put it up front. So what you're going to say is, as the Egyptian material shows it, the method of the exegesis of older texts can not be at the same time, and this modifier zugleich is kind of, it's a discourse marker that's picking up the previous sentence, cannot be at the same time on a, or on one, you might even want to say, on one particular epoch established. Rather, it forms, apparently, a characteristic of cultures of writing, or literate cultures.